So I'm Alan Tariba, president of the Fitchburg Historical Society, and we have a couple business items to go through. Eileen Killer, our secretary, will briefly highlight last year's events, and then we'll move to approve the minutes. So, Eileen, do you want to start?
Sure. The minutes, excuse me. For those of you who are members, you're welcome to take a look at the minutes. They're in the back of the room. They're pretty terse. They basically say we met, we voted on the board, we elected people, we talked about what events had taken place over the past year, and Roger gave his treasurer's report. So I did attach to the back of the minutes a copy of the program from last year, which is a recap of our activities. So I think if you're new to the organization or curious about what we do, it would be a helpful source for you to take a look at. So if anybody has issues with them, guess what? You're welcome to join this board and be the secretary. But so any questions from any of the members about the minutes or any concerns? Okay, so my part of this is done. Alan, we'll hand it back to you.
That's easy. Our next reports are from Roger Tesh. He's our treasurer. And
thank you. And I did send out copies of the report by email. I do have someone back giving an indication of our profit and loss reports from 2021 to last year and year to date. And we currently have account balance of $10,794.16 from all accounts. Does anyone have any questions?
any questions? All those in favor of approving the two reports, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. I guess that was easy. Next, every year at the spring general meeting, we have 4 board members that have to be approved for a 3-year term. This year we have 3 returning board members, Eric, Emily, Carol Kinney, and Ann White, and a new member, Aaron Richardson. Are there any other nominations to be on the board? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the nominees?
I move to approve the nominees.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
You're stuck for another 3 years. So I guess, Catherine, do you want to interview or do you want to give an overview of things we did over the last year?
And I'm Catherine Schneider, the Vice President of the Fitchburg Historical Society. We welcome you. You're so great to have you with us this afternoon. And we want to just highlight the year for you, the things that the Fitchburg Historical Society has been engaged in over this past year. In April, at our last annual meeting, Nick Hoffman presented the history of biking in Wisconsin, and then Steve Arnold explored how Fitchburg became a leading bicycle city in Wisconsin. That was an excellent program. In June, the Fitchburg Historical Society participated and spoke at Quivy's Grove, their 45th anniversary of being open as a restaurant in the Fitchburg community. In August, we joined the new consortium of local historical societies that's just getting started and there to help and support one another. In November, our fall program was Prisoner of War Camps in Wisconsin, and that was presented by Bob Block. We've also worked with the city of Fitchburg on the mayor timeline panels that are in process now and will eventually be placed in Fitchburg City Hall. We've offered display cases in the Fitchburg Public Library with exhibits of Fitchburg schools, which just went down. And we have a brand new exhibit there that is just about completed, but open for you to look at. So make sure before you leave today, you go over to the Fitchburg room and look in the display case there, because the new exhibit is on toys through the decades, and it's really a stunning display for you to enjoy. There is also outside the Fitchburg room, we have also an exhibit there that is for you to enjoy, and that one is on traditional games. So lots of things that can take our memories back to what we used to play with and enjoy as toys and games. Then our ongoing activities, we have a Facebook page. We have monthly interviews with Fitchburg Access Cable TV, who are here today. Jeremy with the red shirt on there, looking very official, back by the booth, because we are in such a wonderful partnership with them, bringing interviews of people and places and events of importance to the community here in Fitchburg and beyond. We have a newsletter that comes out. We also have continuing additions to the Fitchburg Historical Society website, which I would highlight for everyone, fitchburghistory.org, which has a wealth of information on Fitchburg history. So I would ask you to just check it out. Our archives are open to the public by request. And then finally, we respond to inquiries received by email and voicemail. So we try to make Fitchburg history very accessible to the public with your inquiries, and then our website is really a fantastic place to go to find out all about history. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eileen, or Ellen, or to Ellen.
I'm going to just make one comment for those that haven't been to the library recently. The Fitchburg room is it's on this floor, all the way on the east side. And it's a great place. There's a lot of things, and they have a wonderful mural there too. Okay. Eileen, are you going to introduce our guest speaker?
Oh, there you go. She's camouflaged in the environment. So as you heard from Catherine, from our recap of 2025 activities, we typically offer 2 public programs a year. And at our December meeting, we started brainstorming the April meeting, and one of our members who was newer to the board said, well, have we ever done anything about the Arboretum? And I think we all kind of looked at each other and thought, no, we haven't. What a good idea. So we contacted the Arboretum, who did a little inquiry internally, and even though it's a very busy season for the Arboretum staff, Susan offered to be available this afternoon. And so many of us enjoy the Arboretum for different reasons. It might be the trails, it might be night walks, it might be the lilacs, it might be the 12-year-olds who go drinking in the park, but we know that that's not a condoned activity for the Arboretum. But we don't necessarily all know why the Arboretum exists and what its real purpose is. So Susan is going to help inform us about that today. So Susan is the native plant garden curator and gardener at the UW-Madison Arboretum. Since 2003, she's worked with students and community volunteers to install, manage, and monitor a 4-acre garden representing southern Wisconsin plant communities. She also leads students and the public in documenting and fostering native bumblebees, including the endangered rusty-patched bumblebee. And those in Fitchburg know there's a bar here called the Rusty Bee that's named after that bee. She is a graduate of Stanford University and earned her MS in botany and her MS in science education at UW-Madison. And although I didn't ask Susan this, would you prefer to have any questions during your presentation or at the end?
Probably clarification questions during, if I say something that's just like doesn't make any sense. But then otherwise, if we wait till the end, it would probably be great, because then maybe I'll answer a question along.
Okay, great. And before I turn it over to Susan, just want to remind you in the back, make sure you grab a coupon or 2 from Fitchburg Farms. They're 10% off all season. And they asked me to make sure that I communicated that they're very happy to do special orders for native plants, for example. And we also have a donation from K&A Greenhouse for $50 for a gift certificate. So if you want to be in the drawing for that, please put your name in the elegantly decorated coffee can in the back, and we'll draw that. And after Susan's done, there's some snacks for everybody. So with that, I would like you to welcome Susan. You have-
Just switch it off and then we won't have the squeaking noise. Okay. This set. Screen up. All right, well, thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak with you today. I will say at the outset that I've never spoken for a historical society before, and I am really basically an accidental historian of Arboretum history. I did give my first tour of the Curtis Prairie 50 years ago this year as a graduate student. So when I realized that, I was like, whoa, I mean, the Arboretum is going to be celebrating its 100th anniversary in 2034. So that's coming up pretty soon in planning time for a centennial. But that sort of struck me as odd. But I have been working a lot with the archives of the Arboretum, and by archives I mean we have a storage room at the Arboretum that has a lot of things in it. Some of them pricelessly precious, and some of them probably are going to be recycled or moved along. But I have been working with UW Archives and UW Records to get the materials that they consider to be really worth it into the UW Archives on campus, so they'll be in safe storage. So I am giving kind of two talks in one today in a way, because I want to talk about the Arboretum, its purpose, some of the things that you might not have thought about, some of the things that I've been kind of thinking about like what, you could start something like the Arboretum back more than 90 years ago and have an idea that, well, it's going to be this. But then how does it really play out? How do those plans and those ideas kind of come into the, come through time? Thank you for the lights. So I picked this title, and just before I get started on the Arboretum itself, I want to share this with you, because I was looking up, I thought of what's past its prologue as a title of the talk, and I'm like, oh, I better check out where that, I know that's Shakespeare, blah, blah, blah. And when I was looking it up, I came to these two statues. And the one here, this one, is called Present, or it's also called Future. And it is a woman with an open book on her lap, and it's a fairly large statue. And the inscription is, "What is past is prologue." This is how the search came up when I was looking up my title. And then there is at the other side of the entrance to this building is this one, not a very nice picture, I'm sorry, but it's called Past, and the inscription is, "Study the Past." The book on his lap, it's a man, is closed. So that is the past, and here we have the present and the future, which is, and then it was, the reason I brought this slide to you is that I was looking at who's the artist? In 1935, which happens to be kind of a starting point for the Arboretum plantings and the Arboretum, like in the ground work that happened. So it's like, well, it's kind of a coincidence. Of course, at that time, in the 30s, there were work programs and art programs that were, in place. So maybe it's not so surprising. But these two statues flank the entrance to the National Archives and Records Administration in Washington. So I just thought that was kind of a neat connection for a place where archives are so, our national archives are so valuable, and where we're kind of echoing that in a smaller way with the Arboretum. Shh. Sure. Will do. Power it down. Okay. Fine. Thank you. So these are the topics I'll cover today: the Arboretum context and some maps of the Arboretum. These are historical maps, because I find that learning about a place that you know pretty well, now I've been working at the Arboretum as an employee for about 23 years, and I've had a lot of occasion to be all over the trails, but also all around in the garden itself as well, and on our restorations and so on. So, but looking at maps, even historical maps, and reflecting back on the current state of affairs and on the work that we do, following our mission and following our goals, we can really learn a lot from the maps. But I'm not going to be able to show you, like, it's not a map study, but there will be some maps and kind of the ways that those inform and lead us to the future. And then this idea of learning from land, that's going to be a theme through the whole thing, because that's what I think of when I think of the Arboretum. You know, people think, sometimes people, as Elaine said, you have, you have people who are thinking of the Arboretum just in one way or another, kind of your own, kind of what comes to mind immediately. But there are, if you think about the whole sweep of time and you kind of think about, well, what would it have been like in 1934? What was the area like? What was the intellectual, the academic space like? What was driving these people to do this project or to start this project at the time? And you have to really change your whole, I'm not telling historians anything that you don't already know, but you really have to change your whole mindset to put yourself in that position. I was also requested to talk a little bit about a place that I've learned a lot about the land and about the Arboretum, and that's the native plant garden. And so I will give you some spring pictures, spring stories, spring flower stories, and sustainable gardening tips for your own garden as we go into the season. This is the rusty patched bumblebee over here. Just to say that is another area in which I'm an accidental person who knows something, because I'm not an entomologist by training, but since we found this bee, or since this bee was found by an expert in our garden, that led into a whole nother aspect of work for me and for a lot of people that I've been able to teach and demonstrate and show how we support our native bees. Okay, a little bit about the sources that I'm drawing from for this. This is not like the history of the Arboretum. There are two histories, official histories, published histories of the Arboretum currently available. The most recent one, of course, led up to only about, maybe now it's probably 12 or 15 years ago in terms of what it covers. But so there's probably another book to be written. Please make note of that. But the focus that I have in learning, in the learning from land theme, are these sources. So maps, we have extensive maps, both aspirational maps or maps of plans. We have like maps of the land, and then maps of what it could become or what they planned for it. Arboretum committee meeting notes and correspondence. Of course, everything was on paper at that point, which explains why we have a storeroom full of things. So those have been very interesting, much more detailed than anything you would be able to come by today if you knew where to look on the server for that same kind of information. So it's a really rich source of information. We have oral histories, we have reflections, we have memoirs. So some of the people that were active in the 30s, 40s, and 50s later did reflections, talks. We have the texts of those, and it's very, very interesting. There were newsletters that were published out to not only the university community, but out to the public, and directors' reports, which are more or less a really good catalog of all the things that were going on at the time, and many different directors over time. Then the land, sources of the land, really relating to the land itself. And by land here, I'm using the Leopold sense of land. So Aldo Leopold, when he wrote of land, and he was not the first person to think of land like this, but he was one of the first to write about it in a way that we have really good access to, is that it includes plants, animals, soils, air, waters, everything and including people, everything that would be within kind of what we might call an ecosystem now. So all of those different elements are included, and included in their interrelationships and their interactions, and through space and through time. So the land itself is it's not just like when you go out and look at the, just look across the Arboretum. It's a lot more complicated than that. So we have planting records. We have the original planting records of Curtis Prairie from one of the original ecologists that was involved with that whole process. We have photos, regular photos, photo points, and we have aerial photos that show a tremendous amount of information about the way the land has changed. We have our current observations of land, so we can look at the land now, and we can look at an area on a map that was to be a certain plant community, and we can look at it now and see, is there any sign of that still being present here? How did it work out? How did it go? Because there is one sentence that really caught my eye when I was reading through some of the materials throughout the different ages of the Arboretum. The Arboretum Committee was the group of faculty who basically ran the Arboretum. Now you go to the visitor center and you see it's got a staff and a director and everything. It seems like it all happens right there. But for most of its history, it was run from campus, or from the Arboretum original visitor center or other buildings before that one, but with hardly any staff, any professional staff at the Arboretum. And these professors were the ones that were working amongst themselves, deciding. And the office for the Arboretum was in Burge Hall on campus, right next to Bascom Hall, for at least until 1970, around that time. So it's just, that's again, just, wait, I thought the Arboretum was over here. So we have current observations of land. We have data sets from long-term monitoring. So those prairies, mostly our legacy prairies, have been sampled at periodic intervals. And so then you can compare vegetational change over time in that way. A lot of those data sets are not automatically compatible with each other because some were done 4 years ago. One of those surveys was done 4 years ago on Curtis Prairie, and another one was done in the 60s. So you can imagine the output of that data is quite different. But we have one of our staff who's a data expert working on bringing all of that information into a format so that it can be seamlessly analyzed and used. Very interesting work. We have student projects and papers. These would be just even, ecology student, like taking an ecology class or something, they have to do a project or paper. So we have a lot of that kind of thing, theses, dissertations that were about the land. And then, of course, publications from either researchers or from students that were doing, that had published their work. A lot of these other projects here are not necessarily published. So here's one of these maps, and I'm just, I've got two that I want to contrast for you. This is from 1935. So it is just a map of what the Arboretum was at that time. There was only about 250 acres originally, and that's just this section here. So what you have to see is here's Manitou Way, Nakoma Road, Monroe Street. So this area here where the duck pond, it's called Spring Trail Pond, even in 1935, but colloquially known as the duck pond. And then you can see the golf course there. That was there before the Arboretum was. And then this area here. So it's about 250 acres. But I think, and this map was drawn by someone in physical plant, building and grounds, it was called at that time. And that was Gallistel. And I think this map, I haven't researched this entirely, and you'll hear me say that 100 times today if you're paying attention, because with history, when you have one question answered, and this is true with ecology and biology and everything else too, you have one question answered and now you have 5 more questions, and so that's the way your progress will go. But I think the purpose of this map was to show the existing part of the Arboretum, about 250 acres here, and just for reference, the visitor center is right the current visitor center is right in here. So you can see a little building, that was the barn right there, and that little building there was the farmhouse, which turned out to be the headquarters of the National Park Service, which ran the CCC camp that was here at the Arboretum, just starting right about the time of this map. But notice this over here. It's in cross-hatching. I think the purpose of this map was to show, they were receiving a donation from Lewis Gardner, the Gardner Baking Company fame, and this from the C.B. Chapman Trust. And these areas here are known as Gardner Marsh now. And I think this was the map that showed what that, it was kind of laying out that part of where that donation would fall, what land that donation would achieve for the Arboretum. So none of this is belonging to the Arboretum, none of this is belonging to the Arboretum, and of course nothing on the south of what would become the Beltline. Now, right now, the road at this time is just a single, like two-lane road, track road coming up here. And then if you know Tony Frank's Badger Tavern, that's right here. So keep that in mind, because that was there then, and it's here now. So you can keep track of that. So the Beltline, of course, is a little different than just a straight line there, but that's the location, it's just to give you an orientation. So none of that land south of the Beltline was involved at this time. And then here is the map from the same year that Professor Longenecker drew. And so here we are, he's showing with a scale here. He was a landscape architect. This is the scale of 10 acres right there. So this is basically showing that 250 acres that I just pointed out on the other map. But his purpose here is completely different. His purpose here is to show, he shows the road coming in. He shows some parking. He shows that headquarters area, which is the barn and the house there. A few other buildings like the garage there. And what you can't see so well on this one is hidden in this map are little notes. So this right here is a northern Rockies forest planting. Here's a shrub garden. Here we see the nursery, Wisconsin prairie. So Longenecker's job, although we associate him now with the Longenecker Garden, which is the horticultural collection, because that was dedicated to him upon his retirement, he really laid out the overall layout. He didn't do it by himself, I'm sure. There was a lot of discussion and conversation about where different parts should go. So Leopold was involved in that, of course, Norman Fassett, some of the other ecologists and from different fields at that time. So there are all, like here's Red and White Pine Association. Here's a food plot, and there's another food plot up here. The food plots were Leopold's first plantings in the Arboretum, which were food plots for game birds. So they were not native plants. They were like grains, like Sudan grass and millet and other grasses and grains. Maybe in the woods here it was something even different than that. I know the ones that were down here were all in the open, so they were those kinds of grains. And that was because his main interest was wildlife ecology. He was very interested in having populations of game birds increasing. So those would be, those are things I kind of see his influence in this map. So there's a lot of aspirational drawing here, but the basic overall pattern does fit. Here is the shrub garden, and if you know, the first plantings of in 1935 were the lilacs right along the road there, which is our east parking lot. Those are the same bushes that were planted in 1935, and this prairie planting began in here in West Curtis Prairie, which was called the Wisconsin Prairie at that time, and those were done in 1935 as well. So what about the name of the Arboretum? Officially, there's the name of the Arboretum, and that's mouthful. But it does give you the feel for, people thought, well, this isn't an arboretum like most arboreta. Most arboreta are a tree collection. And of course, there was planned to have these shrub gardens. I mean, mostly it was discussed as a shrub garden here, not necessarily a tree and shrub collection, which is what it is now as it's fully developed out. But you can see here the different influences. There was going to be an arboretum. The influences of the Eastern, like the Arnold Arboretum and other arboreta, were part of the kind of vision for what a university should have, what a city should have. So the city of Madison should have an arboretum. The university should have an arboretum. These were some of the thoughts that came from other people besides just our own local faculty. It should be a wildlife refuge, and we can see Leopold's influence there, along with a lot of other scientists interested in wildlife, and a forest experimental preserve. So you get the idea there from there would be forestry interest there, and that there would be experimental, so you would be a place where you could, it wouldn't just be set aside, these would be a place where you would actually be investigating and researching. And of course, all the professors were researchers. Their questions were about their different disciplines, about the different organisms that they were working on. So then the name got a little simplified, and even on the map before, you might have noticed that it was called the UW Arboretum and Wildlife Refuge. That was kind of the go-to name. I think it identified kind of the plant side and the wildlife side in the earlier going there. And that name stuck on for quite a while. And actually the official name of, it just occurred to me that in the last few days, the official name of the Arboretum might still be this, like officially, like on the original memorandum of understanding or whatever it was called at that time. So that would be another question that I have to poke around about. Right now, we always just really call it the UW Arboretum. So it gets simplified. But it's important to remember that if you're using the word arboretum, you're coming from the Arnold Arboretum or the Holden Arboretum or any other arboretum that has a more sort of limited view of what that place is, that it is something completely different. And that was something they really emphasized right at the beginning. So now in the 30s, I'm just going to draw this theme of learning about the land or learning from the land. Really none of the work and the progress, none of these sort of seminal events that have happened because of the Arboretum could have happened without this land being available and being the subject of the study and the training ground and the place where people had long-term research relationships with this piece of land. So in the 30s, we were really talking about the land acquisition. As I said, the dedication was in 1934. The Arboretum Committee provided that faculty leadership, the governance, and the research direction for the Arboretum. Who else was there? I mean, there was a small grounds crew, think like it's not even like our current land care crew, but there was like people that would actually do like planting. So say if the professors wanted, and the professors were pretty hands-on too, but say if the professor said we have 10,000 pine trees to plant, they couldn't do that by themselves. So they would have a crew, and a seasonal crew would come in, growing season crew or seasonal crew would come in. And so there was a lot of back and forth about, do we have enough money to pay the seasonal crew for an extra amount of time? We have all these trees to plant. And now we're talking about little tiny trees. We see them on the aerial photo. The little pine trees were like, maybe knee high. You can see them little dots on the map, and then the next interval, the dots are a little bigger and so on. So we're not talking about like planting giant trees. And so the layout of the Arboretum that I showed you before and the plantings and trials began. Food plots were already in the mix. Those weren't native plants, but there wasn't really necessarily an emphasis on, Leopold didn't have an emphasis on native plants. He was a wildlife ecologist, and he learned within this Arboretum committee, because of the different expertise there was, they learned from each other what the other fields brought to this project. And that's very fascinating to see the kind of back and forth with their conversations and meetings. So in the 40s, the planting was continuing. There was no guidebook for how to plant a prairie or how to do this kind of restoration. This had been a former farm. This down here is the picture of the green prairie, which is in Fitchburg, actually, and I'll show you that on a map in a minute. But no one knew how to do this, turn a field, like a farm field, back into a prairie. So there was a lot of experimentation with the techniques, with the methods. Should we use seeds? Should we dig up plants from up near Spring Green that are going to be, destroyed for some other reason? Should we haul those back to Madison and plant them? Shall we use hay from prairies that are already existing that would have seed in it and scatter that? Should we should we use plants? Should we grow plants and then plant them? All these different ideas were, in the mix. So there was a lot of that going on, mostly in the late 30s, because by 1941, World War II had begun, and the CCC camp was ended, and those young men were drafted into the war. But what was left was the beginnings of all that planting. Lots of trees had been planted. I mean, I'm talking about tens of thousands of trees, and then the prairie plots and the prairie areas. The professors were still on board. I mean, some of them did go into some of the graduate students went on into World War II, but some of them returned then, and one of them became a professor. He was actually my major professor, so he was a student of John Curtis, and when he came back, he was he taught at the university until like 1985. So he had a very long 40-year career between his graduate work and his faculty position. So there was research on prescribed fire effects. So they'd had an area planted, and then they would burn a strip through so that some of the plants weren't affected, some of them were by that fire, and see what the response was. And that's how they learned that a lot of these prairie plants, of course, this was long known. We knew the indigenous peoples had already managed landscapes with fire, and this was like kind of the Western scientific way of studying what that effect might be and how beneficial it would be to burn, say, at what frequency or at what time of year, and so on. One of the professors, Henry Green, planted the Green Prairie, and this is a picture of the Green Prairie. He planted that pretty much by himself with, I think he had one helper. He was not interested he was placing the plants himself in that space. It is kind of a low-lying area, the most southernmost part of the Arboretum, and it has different drainage patterns and so on. So he was kind of customizing the placement of the plants, and he just felt more comfortable doing that himself. It took about 10 years to do it. Thousands of plants. It's about, I think, 40 acres or 40 to 50 acres of area. And at that time that this was being planted, and as research continued, more areas were planted in the other prairie as well, and the prescribed fire was being investigated. They were training a lot of graduate students who became then either at UW or at other universities, became leaders and took their knowledge from this place to other places. And a lot of field techniques, innovative field techniques were developed, and analytic techniques to represent what we were seeing, to describe plant communities and that kind of thing. So this was a very active area, both in kind of the academic side, but also on the ground. And at about this time, around the 40s, this quote is from, I like to include this quote because it's kind of after things got started. So it wasn't like what we're going to do, it was like where we are. We're in the process. This is what we're doing now. And this is the way they described the Arboretum. This is like 1949. The Arboretum is valuable for teaching and research in all phases of field biology, for demonstrations of the interactions and relationships of native flora and fauna, and for investigations in the intelligent use of land and water resources. And I think they were, in describing this is some ways what they were already doing, what they were hoping to do, and what they saw the value as. I think we would be able to say this very same thing today with some additions. So in that way, there are parts of the Arboretum's history that just carry through with almost no no change in a way, those basic ideas. And so we had, in the 50s, we saw the most important thing, I think, as far as the land is concerned. The 1950s were a time when graduate students, and that some of the probably late 40s were also, this was also going on, because it took a long time to study all of the native plant communities of Wisconsin. This is northern, southern, all around the state. Many different sites were studied, analyzed, and described. So this is how, and then the book Vegetation of Wisconsin by John Curtis was written and published at the end of the 50s. And that book is still, like, if you have a plant ecologist coming to Wisconsin, that's the book you would give them. It's a book that's valuable to gardeners because you can look at the plant communities and see what are the species that would belong growing together in community. If you have a certain, site and a certain type of location that you're working in. I've been talking a lot about like kind of the academic side of it, the training, the student side of it, the UW side, because the Arboretum really was established to be a very strong part of the university. That was to be job one kind of at first. But there was always an awareness by the Arboretum committee. In fact, a lot of them would give talks. Like they would be me giving talks. Now, not in the community necessarily, but they would give tours and they would give talks in the community about the Arboretum project and about what was going on there, about what, sharing that with the public. And of course, the public was pretty interested in what's going on over there. Madison was growing at the time. They initially did not include anything on the designs for agriculture, even though Wisconsin has an ag school. And here's why. The conversation went like this. Well, we have all the farms just south of our property here that we've already set aside for the Arboretum. So since we have all the farms right next door, we don't need to cover agriculture because we can just use those farms as the demonstration kind of site for our students to learn about agriculture. Well, you know what happened. So eventually the agriculture is not really part of the, of the mission. But the 60s saw a real expansion in public education. And this was not just at the Arboretum, although the Arboretum was kind of a nucleus of it. And it rippled out from the Arboretum because the Arboretum began to really train mostly people who weren't professional ecologists or anything. They were maybe teachers or just parents that had some time on their hands and very good naturalists, and they became even better naturalists. So they would lead tours, and there were so many school tours, both at the Arboretum, but then the Arboretum also trained naturalists that went out to all the other areas. So this is one of these ripple effects of the Arboretum as its influence spread across. So that was a really huge time of expansion, and actually now there are many fewer school tours in this field, over the whole region than there were in this time. There's much more of an emphasis on that kind of youth education and public education than we have now. So in the 70s and 80s, I'm really glossing over a lot of exciting stuff, but the McKay Visitor Center was built. This is the original one, the one that was there first. It was in the late 70s it opened, and that was when the office of the Arboretum then, around that time, early 70s, when the office moved from Burge Hall to the Arboretum itself. First it was housed in a little tiny building there. The director had her office there. I remember having to go to her to request having a research plot in one of the woods for my master's thesis. And she was accommodating. She let me do that part of my study there. But it was a tiny little building because the visitor center wasn't open yet. But so the kinds of scientific studies going on at this time covered like a whole range of things: plant and animal population studies, the life history studies. These would be, focused on different species, in all different areas: forestry, genetics. tree diseases, long-term studies of plant succession, so how does the landscape change over time, plant communities, microenvironments, and soils was huge too. We have a really famous soil scientist who was involved, and this was the logo of the Arboretum. One of this kind of oblong thing would sometimes be the simplified one, but Laboratory of Nature, Medicine, Meteorology, Ornithology, Plant Pathology, Soils, Geology, Wildlife, Zoology, Art, Botany, Entomology, Forestry, Horticulture, and Limnology. And if you look at the Arboretum committee members and you look at their departments over time, there they all are. So there was really something and somewhere for everyone to investigate the questions that they were interested in, to train their students, to ask further questions. So this was around 1970 when this was going on, and also around that time was a broader effort in the area of having regional nature centers scattered across the southern part of the state, at least, that would be interconnected in ways. So Phil Lewis was one of the instigators or developers of that idea. It never quite came to fruition as like a physical thing, but I think the ideas were very powerful at that time, and there was a lot of interconnection. Of course, 1970 is the first Earth Day, lots of interest in the environment at that time. This is a picture from the native plant garden of our compass plant in bloom, but there is the Curtis Prairie next to us in the background there. So the 1990s and 2000s, the long-term research continues, those periodic studies, of course, and then individual research projects, as I've mentioned already. I can't go into all that, but we had a professor dedicated to the Arboretum from botany. She was a wetland ecologist, so she did a lot of wetland experimental, she and her students did a lot of wetland experimental research. This emphasis on adaptive management, where you're managing an area, learning while doing, and then getting feedback from what you see your management results, and then adjusting as you go, kind of this cycle of adaptive work. The visitor center expansion was 2001, and this is really crucial for me coming to the Arboretum, because that's when the native plant garden was established right around the visitor center. I mean, and by established, I mean designed. So through the early 2000s is when we started to install it. The staffing of the Arboretum increased, the volunteer program's growing, and the Arboretum Committee shifts from being a governance and decision-making body to being an advisory body. So now that's kind of a shift. And see how late it is in the history of the, it was a gradual process, but this is that's just an interesting way to think about how, are faculty still involved? Yes, there's still an Arboretum Committee, but the shift of the role had really changed. And then this was the Arboretum mission. This is the Arboretum mission from the year 2000 until 2026. And the reason I say 2026 is that very soon, as you stay tuned, there will be a modified mission to this one. But I think you're going to see, as I said before, these kind of through lines that come through, and you're going to see a lot of the same concepts. We are not like changing who we are. So to conserve and restore Arboretum lands, advance restoration ecology. What that means is to advance the science of restoration. That's when you put restoration ecology in that order. It refers to the scientific side, to the research side, and then foster the land ethic. This is the land ethic again in Leopold's sense, where we have an ethic of caring for land. We are members of a community, of a biotic community. We have that responsibility. And so all of our education, a lot of actually gardening, I think fits into that category as well, just from my own perspective. So in these decades, we really have seen in the 2010s and 20s, we see the active ecological restoration increasing. And this has to do with the increased staff in our land care unit. We had an almost complete turnover of staffing there, and the number of positions was increased. So this has been, and especially in the Grady Tract, which is the part that I'll show you in a second, that's in a lot of it in Fitchburg, and then in the Lost City, which is a mysterious, I mean, from the name you can tell, it's an area which has gotten not too much restoration attention, but is really getting a lot of attention now. So if you go hiking over there, go before the mosquitoes come out and hike around there and look at the forestry mowing and a lot of the research plots that are being set up now to study the effects of the restoration on, on the future development of those areas. A lot of them will be savanna areas. Our prescribed fire program's expanding. I was saying to some folks before that I got a message at about 11 a.m. this morning that from our burn boss that they will be out burning in the Grady tract in the area that's in Fitchburg. I'll show you on the map. Today, starting at 12:30 was ignition. And so I expect if you drive by there or if you're hiking there, it's kind of an interior unit that you will see that that's freshly prescribed fire. Citizen science projects have come into existence and to come into emphasis, and we have a very robust volunteer program across the board at the Arboretum, and then more research permits than ever are being issued for different individual research projects, and we have a graduate fellowship program that has been going on now for about 5 or 6 years, maybe 7 years. So here's the map overall of Fitchburg, and here's the Arboretum up here. So this block right here is the part of the Arboretum we call this whole thing here the Grady tract, because there was the Grady farm that it was when that was acquired. The farmhouse was right about there. And so we call that the Grady tract, and this part's in Fitchburg. So we go a little closer, we can see here, and I've just put those labels in to give you a sense for what this is. So here's Seminole Highway. There's the belt line. Here's the part that's in Fitchburg. So we have the west and east knolls. Those are a little more topography. Savanna areas. The west knoll is a dry sand prairie, remnant prairie. It never was agricultural because it wouldn't grow crops. The Grady Savanna is here. This is, if you're driving up Seminole, you can peek in there now and just see that it's been forestry mowed to like really open it up. So that is an area that you're going to see some changes coming in. And then this is the green prairie here. The area that they burned today is an area right about here, kind of tucked in between. So I don't know how much you could see. I don't think you could really see it from the road or see it safely from the road unless you're on a bike and you stop. But anyway, if you're hiking in there, you will notice it. And then here is the Harlan Hills. This is a prairie restoration from they're at the base for Harlan Hills is here, and Dunn's Marsh and the Dowley area over here. So all of this is interconnected, and there's some nice habitat in here now. Our bumblebees are going back and forth there for sure. So you have a lot of good areas within Fitchburg. I've actually surveyed a lot of different areas scattered around in Fitchburg for bumblebees. So I'm encouraged that there is really a lot of good habitat either developing. And these aren't private homes or private gardens, and there's a lot of that going on too. So I'm just going to put some words up here. This is just some general things about native plant gardens and landscapes. And when I'm talking here about health and diversity, diversity just means what it says. A lot of different types of plants and animals would be present there. Health refers to land health. And that means you could think of that in kind of a comparative way. So if you think of like, I have a neighbor, one of my neighbors has a yard that if I count how many species are in the yard, it's about a half an acre lot. There are like 6 species of plants, like counting all the shrubs and bushes. I mean, all the shrubs, all the trees and the grass. There's like 6 or 7 species. And then like my yard, which is he doesn't like very much, has a lot more different species. So a lot more diversity, probably have a lot more insects, probably have a lot more animals living there, a lot more birds, because there's just more for them to eat. So which one would you say is more healthy? In a land sense, mine is probably more healthy because it has a more complete system there. It has more potential for life to survive in it, mainly due to the management practices that I use. So these areas, native plant gardens and landscapes, are full of life. There's color, there's movement, there's noise, as soon as you plant the plants, they grow a little bit, and suddenly you've got a lot more insects, birds, snakes, mink, maybe skunks, depending on the habitat features. They're sustainable. These are perennial plants for the most part, and so they will come up year after year, or they will seed around into the area. So if you plant with plants, like we did start this whole garden with plants, small plugs, but over time you're going to see changes. And so they will persist over time, and they are maintained with low inputs. So we don't have to do supplementary watering. We don't fertilize. That advantages weeds over native plants. We don't use herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, any of that. We don't have to. And we also do have chances to be in the garden and to take care of it, because unlike that little comment that that I read in one of the early Arboretum committee, it wasn't one of their own meetings. It was in a piece that was like to be put out to the public, and it said, well, once you put the native plants in, they'll take care of themselves. The native plants and animals, it'll all take care of itself. Well, I beg to disagree. It won't necessarily do that, especially on disturbed sites where things are getting established. But it is maintained with low inputs. And we still have the chance to go and weed, edit, is what we call it when we're managing native plants that are getting a little too, rambunctious. So there's lots of things to do, even though you don't have to do all those other like mowing and other energy draining activities. They're of a place. So if I'm in southern Wisconsin and I'm looking at a native plant garden, and I'm up in northern Wisconsin looking at a native plant garden, I can tell, if you know the plants, you can tell where you are by looking at those plants. So that's what I mean by of a place. They really represent the area that they're growing in, if you're using your regional natives. And that means they're adapted to the climate and the soils of that space. They've evolved there for millennia, and they are really your best bet. Even under climate change, they're the best place to start, because most of them are not strictly requiring a narrow range of conditions. That is not the way they are still here. And the gardens are always changing over time. This is actually something we expect and we look for and we want in the garden. It's not going to stay the same. They're not going to stay put. If you like gardens that stay put, this might not be your type. And they're fascinating. There's always, like I said, there's always more questions. Every time you answer one, you've got more. And there's so much growing community interest in this kind of gardening. So it's been really heartening over 20 some years to see people's interest grow so much. This is the native plant garden at the Arboretum. Here's the visitor center with the old one, the original one here, and then the expansion there. The parking lot's all back here now. The parking lot used to be back up in here, but now that's the garden. So the outline is something like this. We're set between the historical Longenecker horticultural garden there, with the lilacs, magnolias, crab apples, and so on. And then the Curtis Prairie is here. This is an additional 1985 addition to the Curtis Prairie. So kind of both of those historical landscapes are right next to the visitor center and next to the native plant garden. And we're also set in the context of Madison now. So we have 14 or 15 around the whole Arboretum, 14 or 15 neighborhoods that are adjacent to the Arboretum. And that's a lot of, that's a human context as well as a biological context. Because like I would say, any bumblebee that's in this area can easily fly over here to these yards and these gardens beyond the golf course there. I don't think they spend very much time at the golf course itself, which is too bad, because golf courses could be a very nice place. And some of I think our Glenway golf course has native plantings within it, so that's really a nice addition. The designer of the native plant garden is Daryl Morrison, and I think it's pretty rare because he designed this garden over 25 years ago, and he has been involved in it all the way along. So, I mean, involved in a let's walk through and let's look at how things are going, and I've been the gardener almost the whole time too. So I think it's very rare to have that kind of a relationship and that kind of opportunity to work together on something. So his designs would look something like this. Is just one little section of the native plant garden where there's a small building, and just by the colors here, you can see these green colors and these more warm colors here. This is the south side of the building. That's the north side. So you just to have a demonstration of, like, if this was your house, plants that you could do in those different microclimates or micro areas. And then this also slopes down, so there's kind of a lower area here, and that is not really a rain garden per se, but the plants here they're going to get a little more moisture, so the planting reflects that in a way, and of course the plants sort that out themselves over time too. You can see his design principles there in curved lines, naturalistic plantings, different areas of shadow and light. Those are all intentional. And then he luckily wrote a book in just published in 2021 called Beauty of the Wild. And it is a combination of design principles about native plant design and a memoir. So he has had a lot of very interesting projects all over the country. The native plant garden at the Arboretum is his favorite. And the reason is that he was a traditional landscape architect as an undergrad, graduated from Iowa State, came to UW for graduate school in landscape architecture, and he saw the Curtis Prairie and visited other natural areas, as we all did when we were in graduate school in this field, and realized, designing with native plants is really going to be more of my direction. The Arboretum was pivotal in his entire career, and I think that's why this project might be one of his favorite. It might be his favorite, as he says. So that's his beautiful book, and a lot of the illustrations, including that cover shot, are from the Arboretum. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of the spring plants. I just can't resist sharing some plant stories with you. Prairie Smoke and Shooting Star are two of our smallest little prairie plants, but be usually in an open area, and they are both about like a foot or so tall when they're blooming. They both have the rosette form of leaves, so just leaves coming out at the ground like this. It doesn't get up on a leafy stalk. And then the flowers are pendulous when they're in bloom. So like this one right here is in bloom, and these over here are in bloom, and they're both pollinated by bumblebees. So the bumblebees come up underneath and grab on it from underneath and vibrate the flower with their wing muscles. So they buzz pollinate that plant. The pollen falls out, and you can see a little pollen falling down on her. She will then groom her body and groom the hairs and pack the pollen onto her corbicula or onto this pollen carrying structure on her leg. And these are the bees that are establishing colonies at this time of year. There's been the first bumblebee queen has been spotted already in Wisconsin, emerged in Walworth County a few days ago. So if you had a pool, if you were in a pool about when the first bumblebee was going to emerge, I hope you had a late March date. Then what happens with both of these flowers is after it blooms and is pollinated, the flower tips back upright like this one, and then some structures on the flower extend. These are the styles, and they extend out into these feathery structures, which are each attached to a fruit at the flower, and as soon as those are ripe, then that is a wind dispersing mechanism. So these are, if you see these in bloom, fruit like this, and they're mature and they'll come off, then those are the ones that are ready to be, ready to move and be planted. And this one, the capsule, here's one going upright, and there's just a capsule. And so it will open at the top and kind of like a little salt shaker or something, then the seeds can be taken out of that. So this plant, the leaves are there now, they're flat on the ground. It hasn't bloomed yet, but it will be blooming soon. This one, the leaves come out early in the season. They emerge from the ground. And after about 6 weeks, after this blooming is done, they die back. So this is a true spring ephemeral. It's just there for a few weeks visible, but those seed stalks will be visible for a long time while they're maturing. And so then you could, if you can find those, you can harvest some seed. And when I say harvest some seed, I mean not at the Arboretum, okay? Not in the garden. So this is a kind of habitat you would find those in. We have, at least we have the prairie smoke in here. I don't think we had shooting star on the list for this one, but this is a garden that Daryl designed after we lost a big tree. We had an area that's wide open, and he said, oh, this was like during the pandemic. He said, oh, do you want me to design a new garden for that? I said, sure. And so he designed this garden with 5 of our native short grasses, so they're all fairly short. There's 5 different kinds, including this beautiful purple love grass that you can see a little ribbon of it coming through, planted in through here in that curved line. Just a gorgeous plant. This picture would be from August, but I just want to give you a feel for the kind of garden that those other plants would grow in. Here's our tall grass prairie. So here, this is in the spring again. We have the spiderwort blooming. That's the purple here. So in the morning, you'll see those all in full bloom. And then the beginning of the early sunflower here, this yellow one, that's the Heliopsis or ox eye, and that's just starting to bloom there. There's a grass here, a cool season grass, the blue joint grass that already bloomed. Here's some heuchera or alum root down here, a little bit of daisy fleabane it looks like. So there's always something blooming, but not always at the same, not the same things throughout the season. The mesic prairie, I'll just see what mesic means. If you had dry and wet, mesic would be right in the middle. So it refers to the soil moisture, and medium soil moisture would be mesic. And then you could have like dry mesic or wet mesic, which would be kind of intermediates along that scale. And you'll see those terms used maybe in a list of plants that tells the habitats that are required for the plants. So this just gives you an idea. But if you have a plant that likes mesic soil, you can usually get away with a little drier or a little wetter. Let the plants help you figure that out. Now moving into the shade a little bit, and I'm using the savannas here as an example because savannas are areas that have kind of a dappled shade, maybe limited trees, not a deep forest shading, but like a kind of moderate shade or dappled shade. And those are pretty common in our home landscapes where you'd have, maybe one big tree, but then so you don't get full sun everywhere, but you get some sun, at different times of the day. So these are good plants for those situations. The wild geranium here, which is about maybe knee-high and grows spreads through the area with its underground stems. And then these two, which are seeding, the golden Alexanders and the columbine, which just spread by seed along the way. And so the columbine is a hummingbird and bumblebee pollinated. This one's usually more pollinated by flies, I think, or that's usually what I see visiting it. Your observations of all of that are really very valuable though. So keep your eyes on your flowers to see who's visiting. Here's the spiderwort again. Those are day flowers. So each spiderwort flower only blooms for a day and not even a whole day. Like if it's a sunny, hot day, by lunchtime, the petals are curling up and giving up. But you can see there's huge clusters of buds on each stalk. So there's new buds, for weeks there's new buds every day, and then there's the older ones that are producing their seeds after they've been blooming. And then this is the downy wood mint, another really great pollinator plant, a mint with these rings of flowers on stalks like this. And this one both of these really only spread by seed. And they both like a little bit of open ground. So if you have a disturbance, like a woodchuck digs a big like den, you'll find spiderwort moving in there right away. These are some more spring ephemerals. So this is in those wooded areas, but notice how much sun there is. So before the trees have their leaves on is when the spring ephemerals come up out of the ground and bloom and set their seed. And so here we have a spring beauty, about 3 or 4 inches tall, that's it, with these beautiful little flowers and lots of buds, and it will spread by seed. It will spread into disturbed areas like a pathway or anything like that, but it's a very low-lying plant, and it does have, it has a number of insect visitors, but it does also have a specialist bee that just visits it and no other plant. So that would be a bee whose life cycle is only during the time that this little plant is blooming, over a period of a few weeks at the most. And then we have our wild geranium back here and the woodland phlox, which is this one here. If you have that one and you have deer, I recommend caging it because the deer will, I mean, like our deer will they just mow that down. They don't kill it, but they keep it from blooming. So it's still present, but it's not, but they'll eat everything above. And then this one, and that one has green leaves throughout the summer. This one dies back and is gone. The spring beauty is gone during the time that, once the canopy is closed, and that plant is all ready for next year already. Jacob's Ladder, another one for these kind of shady, semi-shady sites, and that one stays green it blooms in the spring, but it stays green all summer too, so you still have the plants. And here's your wild ginger. That is a good understory plant for deeper shade. It grows by rhizomes, so it spreads all around an area, but the seeds are also scattered by ants, so you might have a cluster of this. I have one on the downhill side of my house, and then suddenly I was seeing the seedlings of it uphill around the corner of the house, and that was only ants that could have been bringing those up there. So it is dispersed by ants, and then it could grow other plants within it. It's a good ground cover, but here's some maidenhair ferns coming up through there, and we have other species as well. So these are my gardening tips, and a lot of these are applicable to any kind of gardening, but some of them will be a little more focused on our native species and kind of what the philosophy that we use and what we've learned about growing native plants. I'm a plant ecologist by training, so I knew the plants, largely thanks to the Arboretum for teaching them to me 50 years ago. And so I was prepared for knowing the plants, but knowing the gardening of the plants is a different topic. And that's what you learn by doing it and by being observant and by having the opportunity to kind of experiment along the way. That same thing, having as your goal that you're going to learn about it while you're doing it and learn from the land. So I like to maximize the number and diversity of native plants in the landscape, meaning there's always room for one more native plant. And there's usually room for one more kind of native plant. Because even in a small area, I think I tried to count how many species I can see in this picture. I can see 4 species in bloom. So that's good because you're always looking to see that you have, blooming throughout the season. But I can also see others by their leaf shape, and I could see maybe 12 species just in this picture without being on site. If I were on site, I could identify even more, I'm sure. But this picture doesn't give me all the detail. So that's the first thing. This is probably the most important one, and anyone who's gardening knows this, that you should match the plants to the particular site conditions, and the site conditions we're talking most importantly would be the amount of sunlight, the amount of soil, the soil type, which will determine a bit about the soil moisture, but then there's also like the lay of the land and where does what direction does your site face? If it's a south-facing slope, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but the daffodils that I've seen blooming in the last couple of days are all growing on the south wall of wherever they're blooming, they're on a south wall somewhere. So that's been my observation over the last few days. This is an interesting case here because this is the north side of the building, and I have spring ephemerals of woodland wildflowers growing in a zone about 2 to 3 feet away from the, where the overhang ends. And then if you have those same plants, some of them were called to be planted on the other side of this path here, and they're there, but they're struggling. And whereas the ones in here are just fine, because the north side of the building is shadier, cooler, moister, and it provides that little microclimate. And we all have little spots that we maybe haven't even thought about, like, I wonder if it would grow there. And so it's kind of neat. These plants are pretty robust. If you have them growing somewhere and they're not doing well, you might try moving them. I mean, what do you have to lose? And some of them will become, it might get too shady, or you might lose a big tree and now it's too sunny. And so feel free to like move them around. Even if they have deep roots, if you have enough root material, you can easily divide them or move them or take seed and do it that way as well. So this is another case here, which is our rain gardens. You can kind of see a basin there. So there's plants in the basin that are more suited to getting more moisture more often, and then ones up on the rim that get adequate moisture. These plants usually grow to be about, these Joe Pye weeds get to be about a normal rain year, about 8 feet tall when they're blooming. So there's that, but there's a variety of spots within that area, and you can make your best guess. This isn't matching like 1-to-1. It's getting a good educated idea of where it will be successful and then trying it and then going from there. Focusing a little more on the pollinators, we like to have the seasonal sequence of flowering with different flower forms. So here's like a flower that's really open with a pollen right out here, nectar really close to reach, and these are bees about the size of honeybees. They are only out for like 3 weeks in the spring when this plant and willows and things like that are blooming. So right now is about the time you're going to be able to see them in the next few weeks, and then you'll never see them again over the rest of the year because they do all their life cycle within that 3-week period, and they're ground nesters, so they're underground the rest of the year with their provisions and their development throughout the rest of the season. So this time next year, you'll see their offspring coming out, repeating that cycle. Whereas we have another bee over here. This is a leafcutter bee, and this kind of flower structure is the baptisia or the wild white indigo. And it has like a spring-loaded kind of structure. And so like a bumblebee or a bigger bee has to kind of spring that flower open. And here you can see the pollen kind of comes shooting out onto the underside of the bee. And this bee just happens to carry its pollen under its abdomen. So that's kind of handy for that pickup there. But the nectar, of course, down in this part. So some bees cannot use a flower like that. Only certain bees can. And then here, again, our large rain garden, where you can see it at mid-season and then at the end of the season. This is the other half of it. And you can see just a few species. So showy goldenrod, New England aster, and Riddell's goldenrod here, the very last species to be blooming. So if there's any pollinators out at that time of year, they're on those plants because there's nothing else in bloom for them. This idea of soft landings is an idea of basically creating a flower bed or leaf bed underneath a mature tree. Grass won't grow there. People are like, oh, how can I get grass to grow in the deep shade under this tree? I was like, well, it won't do that. But you could have a garden under there by putting the leaves there. And then if you're familiar with Douglas Tallamy's work on Lepidoptera, the way they use these keystone species of trees, oaks have over 500 species of butterflies and moths that use the canopy as food, of course. And you're like, well, I don't want caterpillars eating my oak trees. But for the most part, those caterpillars aren't going to make it. They're going to become food for the bluebirds or for the songbirds that are taking the caterpillars, and most of them for their young. But some of them do have to complete their life cycle in order for there to be caterpillars for the birds and for the rest of the food web. So this idea is just to create this, create this area around the base of the tree, like a little leaf sanctuary, if you will, because when those caterpillars are mature and they finish feeding, they come down the tree and they'll either pupate underground or within leaf litter like this, underground or within leaf litter like this, and they will mature then and hatch out as their adult forms, and then their life cycle continues. So it's just a way of maintaining more life within your garden that's really going to have benefits throughout the food web. We, of course, recommend planting species native to the area. In this case, there's that white Baptisia again with a big, huge black and gold bumblebee. She's a queen, just getting her pollen ball started here, establishing her colony. And then there are some horticultural varieties and other ornamental plants. So you can just check, like, is anybody visiting them? And if you're making decisions about pollinators and you want to maximize your pollinator benefits, then you could maybe replace a plant that doesn't have insect visitors with a plant that does, and maximize your space. We have lists of native plants that are specifically known to promote pollinators. So this is the rusty patched bumblebee again. And these references here, I should have mentioned this before. At the end of the talk, I have a link that you will be able to access, and all of these things that I've mentioned will be listed on there. So you can look those up and just go to them. We avoid pesticides. This is especially the systemic insecticides that get into they're used in plant production in some nurseries, not native plant nurseries, like these plants are from a native plant nursery, but where they do a soil drench of the plants when they're small, and then the compounds go into the plants, they go into the stems, leaves, flowers, nectar, pollen, and they are persistent in that tissue, and of course anything that eats them or uses the pollen or uses the nectar will be adversely affected by those. And they're long lasting. So they stay in the plant for, like, I've seen figures like 2-3 years, perennials. And also if they're used in, like in a soil drench, not all of it stays in the root system of the plant. So it goes through and goes into the aquatic systems, and it also kills insects in the aquatic systems too, which is not good. So we've got to make sure that our nursery plants are not pre-treated. The way to do that is to ask, are they pre-treated? Have they been treated with any systemic insecticides? And if the answer is no, and the people can assure you of that, then good. And if they can't assure you of that, then you might want to investigate further and make your wishes clear that you don't want plants that have been treated with systemic insecticides, because consumer pressure is what helps change things a lot of the time. And many nurseries, of course, native plant nurseries will be proud to tell you they're not using those, and they know what the consumers are demanding. Having some rough areas in the garden. So this is where my volunteers say, oh, so if you want my garden to look like that, you want me to not work so hard? Mm-hmm. And so it's basically kind of creating access for different stages of the life cycle, either for nesting, like bumblebees would nest in here, no problem. They would look at that some of the species would look at that with really excitement. But we try to avoid using landscape fabric, thick rocks for mulch. I know what you're doing that for, it's to avoid weeds, but if you can plant your plants closer together with native plants, they will eventually, and won't take too long, their root systems will take up so much space underground that the weeds, the traditional weeds, will not be able to get established within there. So plant more plants is my basic advice. We leave the plant material standing over the winter, and then we trim, or in some cases prescribe fire, because we have a professional crew. So for example, this area back here is currently burned down they did that a few weeks ago. But we leave the stems, we leave some stems. We're not doing a full cleanup of the area. We're just getting light to the plants that are coming up now. So they're not like self-mulched from the year before. And it makes it a little more attractive, of course. If you're doing a demonstration garden, that's what you want to, have it appealing, but it's not biologically necessary, but it does make for a prettier garden. And those stems are used by stem nesting bees in this upcoming season, and then they'll hatch out the following season. We like to include small interpretive signs. This is just nice if you're doing native plant gardening at home. It looks a little bit different from your neighbors, that your neighbors can appreciate what you're doing by having signs like that. And sometimes, like, children make up the signs and draw pictures and everything, so it's really appealing in a communications way. Cues to care is just where you have maybe a distinct line where here's the lawn,
a distinct line there. Maybe there's a little bit of mulch, like just in that line to hold it. And then here's your garden. It's just an intentional signal that this is intentional. I didn't just let my grass, my lawn go to seed here. This is an intentional space. And then sharing now these maybe they don't seem like gardening moves, but they are. Sharing with children, sharing with families, sharing with your community. And then this is one of the best ways to spread the word for people is to when it's time to harvest seed, invite people to come harvest seed. You'll have more seed than you need. If you're growing a garden like this, have people take seed. What's your favorite plant? Here's some seed from it, and just keep spreading the word that way. And then document, and I don't mean this to feel like homework. There's a lot of creative ways to do this, but if you're keeping track of things, just like we keep track of our prairie development over the decades, here you'll have some interesting records. And this can be done in a lot of creative ways. I have one garden volunteer who after she does her gardening in her yard and she's done with her work day, she does a video story. And she just pans around and she talks about what she did. And she goes, I would never write this down in a notebook, but I've got pictures of it. I've got my audio that I know what I did. It's the way she found to do her records. There are ways to share it out more, like broadly. So like Bumblebee Brigade, iNaturalist, of course, eBird or Journey North, depending on what organisms and what kinds of records you'd like. But we chose, and how I became an accidental entomologist is that someone discovered the rusty patch bumblebee in the native plant garden about 16 years ago. And he was from California. He identified the bee. I didn't meet him when he was at the Arboretum, but he emailed the picture. And he told the story of how it was so rare and had been lost over most of its range. And had we seen any more of them? And I went, I don't know. So what we found out was for bumblebees, you'd use photography to learn the IDs and to document the occurrences. So I started taking pictures of bumblebees, and this is what happened. All the other things. So I don't know, and probably you don't know how to identify all of these things. Some of them you can do easily, like here's the 8-spotted forester moth, the day-flying moth, beautiful, and monarch butterfly, of course. Here's a fritillary, but there's a lot of these you might not know. Like I thought that was a bumblebee at first. It's really a fly. So what we do is we can identify, we've got experts on hand, wisconsinbutterflies.org, bugguide.net, where you send a picture in like this and an expert will identify that for you. Otherwise, it's like iNaturalist, you won't get as reliable of an ID on something that's, more rare like that. So I do recommend bugguide.net for submitting your pictures. We have 500 species of native bees in Wisconsin. So you'll get pictures of other bees besides bumblebees, and here they all are, or some of them are. This one I'll point out for just a special case. It's common when Monarda's blooming. It's gathering pollen from the very tip of the flower there, the tubular flower. It's not getting any any nectar, just the pollen out there. And this is a specialist bee on Monarda. So again, its life cycle is only if the months, the month or weeks that Monarda's in bloom are this bee's life cycle. The rest of the time, it's just developing it's provisioned its eggs and they're just developing independently. So these will all be identifiable on bugguide.net as well. And then with bumblebees, here's where you get to do it, and I hope everyone does. Has anyone been involved with bumblebee? Has anyone seen the rusty patch bumblebee? Okay, good. We've got a whole room full of people that can join in the fun. This is the way we do it. We've got this bee just clamoring around on this flower, and I just took about probably 15 pictures of her. Here's a back view or dorsal view. I like to have that so we can see the pattern on the abdomen. How many, she has 6 segments, so like how many segments are one color, how many segments, here's a yellow one back at like T3 or so, the third segment, and we can see this part of her head from a side view, and we can see a face view here if we needed to look at the shape of her face. So either one of these pictures, I could identify that bee. There's her name. And when you're doing this, you're taking like 15 pictures of the same individual, then take a spacer picture. And then take more pictures of other individuals. So then you can pick out these pictures, you can submit them to Bumblebee Brigade, or the Facebook page, that's kind of the user-friendly version before you submit it to this. And one of the wonderful educators will help you, Judy Cardine will help you with your IDs. We are learning from this statewide project which bumblebee, we have 20 species of bumblebees in Wisconsin. Where are they living? And where and when do they come out? Like, when do they emerge? Like, I wouldn't know about Walworth County queen bee, first queen bee in Wisconsin, if it weren't for this project announcing it because someone sent in their sighting. But we're also learning, so that's what learning on a statewide basis, lots of information, but we're also learning things just from, you'll learn things from your photography, like behavior. Here's a rusty patch bumblebee. It's one of the only species that nectar robs on Monarda. So she's just poking her tongue through the tube of the flower instead of entering, from outside, hovering, and then putting her tongue through there. And most of the other bumblebee species, I think only one I've ever seen doing this, but I see Rusty Patch doing it a lot. So that's kind of cool. Something you can just discover on your own. And this is the queen Rusty Patch. She doesn't even have a rusty patch, but that's what she looks like, nectaring on late. So this is a future queen, nectaring in September on the showy goldenrod. And then here we ask ourselves, well, there's 20 bumblebees. Why do all the bumblebees use the flowers the same way? And the answer is no, not yet. We know that they don't. Here's the rusty patch bumblebee, the head, the thorax, the abdomen. Here's the second abdominal segment. There's the rusty patch and a little yellow boundary, a little yellow border toward the back of the bee. That's essential. It's a very easy bee to learn. The males and females look the same. So once you've got an idea of that, you don't have any to worry too much about color variations, except for this could be darker or lighter. Here's where they're found. These are records since 2006. So you can see the original range of the rusty patch was from Maine all the way across Canada, up to here, down, and to the mountains of Georgia, which are kind of off this map. So this is the full range. It was a common bee, and now it's been lost over most of its range. The Midwest has a good population, and there's a remnant population here in West Virginia and Virginia mountains that is completely distinct genetically from these, very, very different. So that's been a recent interesting discovery, but here's the main group of the sightings. And when we look at it close up, look at Wisconsin. And most of that is you and me and other people like us taking pictures of bumblebees and submitting them. And this is just rusty patch. So this is the federally endangered species now since 2017. So I invite all of you to join Bumblebee Brigade and that Facebook page where you'll learn a lot. And that's the end. So thank you.
Well, I'm impressed, and it brought back a lot of memories when I worked as a work study student for Professor Hasselkuss. So, yeah. And I will say, from my own experience, native plants, you don't have to work as hard because they're adapted to your area. Does anybody have any questions for Susan? Eric.
You mentioned the 250 original acres of the Arboretum and how it didn't extend across the belt line. When was that Grady farm added?
Let's see. They were planting, I think it was in the 40s, but I would have to look that up. It might be on I don't know if it's on our website or not, because there were, it wasn't like there were part and parcels, added on over time. But the Grady tract was I think that was added all in one, pretty much in one group. They actually, originally, one of the aspirational maps shows the entire area north of the railroad, what used to be now the Cannonball Trail, but what used to be the railroad. So they were hoping they would be able to acquire all of the land that had then become Arbor Hills. Can you imagine that?
The belt line was put through, I think, in the late 40s.
Yes, 49, that's right. So it would had to be earlier in the 40s because
There was a lot of controversy
Yes.
about the arboretum, or the belt line cutting the arboretum in two.
yeah, I think the main objection at the time, and my major professor was just finishing his degree in 1949, and so I got some firsthand stories about that. The main thing was that the footprint of the belt line was so wide, even when it, even in the original one, it's been widened twice since then, but in the original footprint was so wide that they had already planted trees up, and they'd already planted trees at the top of the hill there. So they had to actually, what they did was they actually moved some of the trees they'd planted that were in the footprint of where the highway would go through and planted them along the boundary of where the highway would be, on the north side. And that's why those pines kind of continue on all the way down there that aren't really in the original plan. So they did move some trees, small-ish trees, or maybe bigger than they were planted for sure, but several years old. So that does narrow the time down, because 49 was the first belt line, and then it would have had to be before that. So not too far after, within a decade of the map that I showed you, yeah. You could do a whole talk on just the maps. It would be fascinating. Yeah. Another question? Yes.
I run in the Arboretum and have been running through that Lost City area.
Yes.
What are the plans? Are you all planning on taking out a lot of the trees then that are in there, or like thinning things? It really looks astonishingly different
Yes.
than it did several months ago.
Well, the reason for that is that the understory under the big trees that are in there is mostly invasive shrubs. So buckthorn, honeysuckle, and the roundleaf bittersweet, which is the non-native bittersweet. So they've used a forestry mower. That was another thing that happened in the in the 2010s. We got some equipment besides staffing. We got some equipment. So that's like a skid steer that can just basically mow down trees that are about that big, and big shrubs and things. So it just drives through, and there's a lot of slash on the ground after it, but of course that'll break down. Those areas will be burned, and as that stuff dries out, and then we watch for rebounding vegetation. So sometimes when you've cleared all that out, the native plants are still there, but suppressed, and they'll reappear like decades later. You're like, what? But we're also doing seed additions and, enhancing the areas too. So yeah, it's really exciting, isn't it? You're just like, where am I? But the thing to remember is all the material that's being driven over and driven down is, for the most part, is just brush, invasive brush that, if you were doing it by hand, would take forever. And then it comes, come back, because they'll go after they use the forestry mower, they'll go back and treat any resprouts or anything coming back, and you can really convert an area from just brush filled to a really reasonable native plant area at that point. Yeah. Yes.
Speaking of maps, will any of the maps, or are any of the maps available online?
Yeah, the two that I have in the slide presentation are available online in the in the library digital collection. Now, the digital collection is a little bit spotty, but I think because it was, we had a lot of materials that were kind of a mix of materials that were in the initial digital, when they were initially developing the digital collection back 20 years ago or so. And so a lot of the project that I'm doing with the archives will be to get materials that aren't digitized yet in there. Those large, if anyone has any hints about large format digitizing, I'd be glad to hear them, because that turns out to be turn out to be kind of a sticking point for us. But there's got to be a way, so we're going to work on that. Any other questions? Okay, thanks.
Well, I want to encourage everybody, before you leave, we're going to do a drawing for the gift certificate. So if you want to be considered, please put your name in there. We've got a lot of snacks. And feel free to grab some extra coupons and share them with your friends. So thanks, Susan. It's a very exciting and a hybrid combination.